Dr. Kang wasn't like other aliens in the Galactic Research Station. His careful nature and attention to detail had earned him respect among his peers. On this ordinary day, his scaled fingers moved slowly over the floating display screen, examining the latest batch of human DNA samples that had arrived from Earth. The laboratory was quiet except for the soft hum of machines. Bright lights reflected off the metallic walls, creating an almost sterile atmosphere. Dr. Kang's workspace was neat and organized, with various instruments arranged perfectly on his desk. His 6 fingers tapped nervously on the edge of his workstation as he stared at the results before him. Something was different about these samples. In his 50 years of studying alien life forms, he had never seen anything quite like this. The DNA patterns displayed on his screen showed signs of complexity that went beyond random evolution. His bioluminescent spots, a natural feature of his species that reflected their emotions, began to pulse with a deep purple color of confusion and worry. "Computer, run the analysis again," he commanded, his voice slightly shaking. The machine hummed, processing his request. While waiting, he looked out the large observation window at the Earth below. The blue planet spun slowly, its white clouds swirling across its surface. Humans seemed so simple from up here, yet their genetic code told a very different story. The computer beeped, showing the same results. Dr. Kang's spots now flashed rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. In all his years of studying various species across the galaxy, he had developed an instinct for genetic patterns. Natural evolution left certain marks like signatures in the genetic code. But these human samples, they were different. Too different. He reached for his communication device and called his trusted assistant, Dr. Jai-yun. She had been working with him for the past 10 years and had proven herself to be exceptionally skilled at spotting details others might miss. Unlike him, she was younger and often brought fresh perspectives to their research. "Jai-yun, I need you in the main lab immediately," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's something you need to see." Dr. Jai-yun arrived quickly, her own spots glowing with curiosity. She was shorter than Dr. Kang, with lighter-colored scales and more delicate features. Her 4 eyes blinked rapidly as she approached his workstation. "What did you find?" she asked, adjusting her laboratory coat. The standard-issue garment looked slightly too big on her small frame. Dr. Kang moved aside, allowing her to see the display. "Look at these sequences," he said, pointing to specific sections of the genetic code. "Tell me what you see." Jai-yun's spots began to change color as she studied the display. Her expert eyes moved quickly over the data, taking in every detail. After several minutes, she stepped back, her spots now glowing bright yellow, a sign of excitement and surprise. "This is impossible," she whispered. "The patterns, they're too perfect." She moved closer to the display again, her fingers tracing the floating images. "Natural evolution is messy, Dr. Kang. It leaves behind unused code, redundant sequences, genetic debris. But this," she paused, looking at him with all 4 eyes wide. "This is like reading a book where every word has been carefully chosen." Dr. Kang nodded slowly. "Exactly. And look at these sections here." He highlighted several sequences. "These patterns repeat with mathematical precision. Nature doesn't work like this." They spent the next few hours analyzing the samples from different angles. Each new test confirmed their initial findings. The human genetic code contained structures that appeared to be deliberately designed. Some sequences were so perfectly arranged that they could only have been engineered by an intelligent hand. As the station's artificial day cycle began to dim, signaling evening, both scientists sat in stunned silence. Their discoveries raised uncomfortable questions. Who had engineered these sequences? When had it happened? And most importantly, why? "We need to run more tests," Jai-yun finally said, breaking the silence. "And we need to be careful about who we tell. This kind of discovery." She trailed off, her spots pulsing with worry. Dr. Kang understood her concern. This discovery could shake the foundations of how the galactic community viewed humans. Earth had only recently joined the galactic community, and humans were still seen as newcomers, barely advanced enough to qualify for membership. But if their DNA had been engineered by some ancient, advanced civilization. Agreed, he said firmly. For now, this stays between us. We'll need to gather more evidence before we make any official reports. As they prepared to leave the laboratory for the day, both scientists knew they were standing at the beginning of something enormous. The quiet lab, with its humming machines and floating displays, had just become the starting point of what might be the biggest scientific discovery in galactic history. Dr. Kang took one last look at the genetic sequences before shutting down his workstation. His spots pulsed with a mix of excitement and fear. Whatever they had discovered here today, he had a feeling it was just the tip of something much bigger. Something that might change everything they thought they knew about humans and their place in the galaxy. 2 weeks had passed since the initial discovery, and Dr. Kang's laboratory looked nothing like its usual organized stuff. Holographic displays filled every available space, casting a blue glow throughout the room. The walls were barely visible behind the floating screens, showing endless streams of genetic data. Dr. Kang moved between the displays, his scaled form casting shifting shadows. His usually neat appearance had become disheveled, showing signs of his endless work cycles. His spots pulsed with various colors as he studied each new piece of information, reflecting his changing emotions as he made new discoveries. They had brought in Dr. Lee, the station's best quantum computing specialist, to help make sense of the patterns they were finding. She was different from the Proximans, with her multiple tentacles and crystalline skin that sparkled under the laboratory lights. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for their mathematical abilities and computer expertise. "Look at this section," Dr. Lee said, her tentacles dancing across the holographic controls. "The complexity isn't random. These sequences follow mathematical rules we've never seen in natural DNA." She pulled up a new display showing a complicated pattern that spiraled through the genetic code. Dr. Kang watched as she explained her findings. "Each pattern we find leads to another, like a trail of breadcrumbs. Someone wanted these to be found, but only by those who knew what to look for." The team had been working nonstop, comparing human DNA with samples from thousands of other species in the galactic database. Nothing matched. Even species that had evolved in similar conditions showed nothing like the precise engineering they found in human genetics. Dr. Jai Yun entered the laboratory, carrying fresh data tablets. "The latest tests are complete," she announced, her spots glowing with excitement. "We found something new in the telomere sections." Telomeres were the end caps of DNA strands, usually simple repeated sequences that protected genetic material. But in humans, they had discovered hidden patterns even there. "It's like finding a signature," Dr. Lee explained, her tentacles moving faster with excitement. Whoever engineered these sequences wanted to make sure their work would be recognized eventually. Dr. Kang had barely slept in the past 2 weeks. His quarters remained unused as he spent cycle after cycle in the laboratory, studying the data. Even when he did try to rest, his mind kept working on the puzzle before him. They had discovered that human DNA contained what appeared to be dormant sequences, genes that were perfectly formed but inactive. These sequences were unlike anything found in nature, where unused genes typically degraded over time. "These dormant sections," Dr. Lee said, bringing up another display. "They're like computer programs waiting to run. They're complete, perfect, but something's keeping them switched off." The implications were staggering. Whatever civilization had engineered human DNA had built in capabilities that humans weren't yet using. It was like finding a spaceship with engines that hadn't been turned on. Their research had to remain secret. Only a small team knew what they were working on. The station's other scientists noticed the increased activity in Dr. Kang's laboratory, but assumed it was just another routine research project. As they worked, they began to notice patterns in how the engineered sequences were hidden. They weren't randomly scattered through the genome, but placed at specific intervals, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Whoever did this, Dr. Jai-yun observed, they were incredibly advanced. The engineering is so precise, so perfect. They must have had technology far beyond anything we have now. Dr. Lee's quantum algorithms kept finding new layers of complexity. Each discovery led to more questions. Why had humans been engineered this way? What were the dormant sequences meant to do? And most importantly, when would they activate? The laboratory had become their world. Food was brought in, and they worked in shifts to ensure someone was always monitoring the data. They couldn't risk missing anything important. It's like reading a book written in a language we barely understand, Dr. Kang said, studying a particularly complex sequence. We can see the words, but the full meaning escapes us. As the second week drew to a close, they had gathered enough evidence to be certain of one thing. Human DNA had been deliberately engineered by an advanced civilization. The precision, the hidden patterns, the dormant sequences, none of it could have occurred naturally. Dr. Kang stood at his main workstation, his spots pulsing with deep blue light, a sign of deep thought. They had uncovered something that would change the galaxy's understanding of human origins. But with that knowledge came responsibility and risk. The question now wasn't just about what they had found, but what they should do with this information. The truth about human origins could shake the foundations of galactic society. Humans, considered newcomers to the galactic community, might actually be the product of one of the most advanced civilizations ever known. As they prepared for another cycle of research, Dr. Kang knew they were only beginning to uncover the truth. Whatever they found next would take them deeper into a mystery that had been waiting millions of years to be discovered. The quiet of the rest cycle was shattered when Dr. Jai-yun burst into Dr. Kang's quarters, her spots flashing rapidly with intense excitement. Dr. Kang had been trying to rest after 3 straight work cycles, but sleep had eluded him as usual. Dr. Kang, you need to see this immediately. Jai-yun's voice trembled as she spoke, her 4 eyes wide with excitement. She was still wearing her laboratory coat, suggesting she hadn't taken any rest at all. Dr. Kang rose quickly, his own spots beginning to pulse in response to her obvious agitation. He didn't even bother changing out of his rest clothes as he followed her through the station's quiet corridors. The emergency lights cast a soft glow, creating strange shadows as they hurried toward the laboratory. Inside the lab, Dr. Yun was already waiting for them. As the station's leading cryptography expert, she had been brought into their secret research just days ago. Her crystalline skin reflected the holographic displays surrounding her workstation, creating tiny rainbows across the laboratory walls. "Look at this," Dr. Yun said, her voice unusually quiet. She gestured to a display showing what humans had dismissed as junk DNA, genetic sequences they thought had no purpose. "We've been looking at it all wrong. These aren't unused sequences at all." Dr. Kang moved closer to the display, his spots pulsing with curiosity. Humans had assumed that large portions of their DNA were leftover evolutionary debris, serving no purpose. But as he looked at Dr. Yun's analysis, he realized how wrong that assumption had been. "Watch this," Dr. Yun said, entering a series of commands. The display changed, showing the DNA sequences in a completely new way. Instead of the usual linear pattern, the sequences arranged themselves in complex, 3-dimensional structures. "It's a code within a code," Jai-yun explained, her spots glowing brighter with each word. "We only saw it because Dr. Yun thought to analyze it using quantum encryption patterns." Dr. Kang stared at the display in amazement. The junk DNA was forming clear patterns, not random sequences, but carefully constructed messages. It was like finding a book hidden inside what everyone thought was just blank paper. "Can you decode it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Yun nodded slowly. "We've already started. It's using a base 4 system, similar to the mathematical language used by the ancient Centaurians, but this is far more sophisticated." They spent the next several hours working together, their excitement growing with each decoded sequence. The messages weren't just random information, they were instructions, carefully preserved within human DNA for millions of years. "Look at this section," Dr. Yoon said, highlighting a particular sequence. "It's describing changes in human neural pathways, but not current ones, potential ones. It's like a blueprint for future development." As they decoded more of the message, their amazement grew. The instructions weren't just about physical changes. They included information about mental abilities, sensory improvements, and even cellular regeneration. It was like finding an instruction manual for upgrading a species. "Whoever left these messages," Jae-yun said, her spots pulsing with awe, "they weren't just engineering humans. They were planning for their future evolution." Dr. Kang studied the decoded sections carefully. Some of the instructions described abilities that seemed impossible: enhanced neural processing, improved cellular repair, even potential telepathic capabilities. Yet the instructions were there, written in the language of life itself. "But why?" he asked, more to himself than the others. "Why leave these instructions hidden in human DNA? And why make them so difficult to find?" Dr. Yoon had a theory. Maybe they wanted to make sure humans would only find these messages when they were ready, when they had developed enough to understand them. The implications were enormous. These weren't just random genetic modifications. They were carefully planned upgrades, waiting to be activated at the right time. The civilization that had engineered human DNA hadn't just been thinking about the present. They had been planning for humanity's future. As they continued working through the rest cycle, more messages emerged from the code. Each new discovery added to their understanding of what had been done to human DNA and what it might mean for humanity's future. "We need to be very careful with this information," Dr. Kang said finally, his spots pulsing with concern. "If this gets out before we fully understand it." The others nodded in agreement. They all understood the weight of their discovery. These messages weren't just scientific curiosities. They were instructions that could fundamentally change what it meant to be human. As the artificial dawn began to light the station's corridors, the three scientists were still working, carefully unraveling the messages hidden in human DNA. They knew they were just beginning to understand the true scope of what they had found, and what it might mean for the future of both humanity and the galaxy. The research team sat in stunned silence as Dr. Kim presented her findings. The small conference room aboard the Galactic Research Station felt even smaller with the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. Dr. Kang's spots were pulsing with a deep blue color that none of his colleagues had seen before. Dr. Kim, their archaeological expert, had spent the last week connecting their genetic discoveries with artifacts found throughout human-controlled space. Her holographic display showed images of various objects that had puzzled scientists for years. Strange devices found buried deep in Earth's crust, mysterious symbols carved into ancient rocks, and patterns that appeared in multiple locations across different continents. "These markings," she said, pointing to a series of complex symbols, "match the patterns we found in the human genetic code. They're not just similar, they're identical." Her fingers traced the flowing lines of an artifact found in what humans called Africa. "We've been looking at these artifacts all wrong. They weren't meant to be read. They were meant to confirm the genetic message when it was finally discovered." Dr. Jae-yun leaned forward, her spots glowing with intense interest. "How old are these artifacts?" "The youngest is about 3 million years old," Dr. Kim replied. "The oldest," she paused, checking her data, "the oldest we found dates back to nearly 7 million years ago. They correspond exactly to the period when early hominids began showing unusual evolutionary changes." Dr. Kang studied the images carefully. The artifacts had been found at key points in human evolution, placed like signposts along humanity's development. Each one contained the same complex patterns they had found hidden in human DNA. "They were watching," Dr. Lee said softly, her tentacles moving slowly in thought. "They were monitoring humanity's development, making sure their genetic modifications were working as planned." The team had spent days decoding the full message hidden in human DNA. What they found told an incredible story. An ancient civilization, far more advanced than any known species in the galaxy, had visited Earth millions of years ago. They had found early hominids, primitive by any standard, but they had seen something special in them. "Look at this section of the message," Dr. Yoon said, bringing up another display. They didn't just modify human DNA randomly. They had a specific goal in mind. The decoded text spoke of potential, of capabilities that could be developed over millions of years of guided evolution. Dr. Kim nodded in agreement. The artifacts suggest they returned periodically, checking on their work. Each visit corresponded with a significant leap in human development. She showed them a timeline, matching artifact locations with major evolutionary changes in human history. The ancient engineers hadn't just been visitors or scientists. They had been architects, carefully guiding human evolution toward a specific goal. The message in the DNA spoke of their plans, their hopes for what humanity might become. But why? Dr. Jae-yun asked, her spots pulsing with curiosity. Why spend millions of years guiding the evolution of one species? Dr. Kim brought up another set of images. These symbols, found in the oldest artifacts, might explain that. They speak of a great danger, something the ancient engineers feared might one day threaten the galaxy. They were preparing humanity for something. The room grew quiet as they considered the implications. Humanity hadn't evolved by chance. They had been carefully designed, their potential shaped by beings with technology far beyond current understanding. The message says more, Dr. Yoon added, highlighting another decoded section. The modifications they made weren't just about physical capabilities. They were building in adaptability, creativity, resilience, traits that make humans uniquely suited for survival in extreme conditions. Dr. Kang moved to the center of the room, his spots now pulsing with a mix of colors that reflected his complex emotions. They were creating a species that could face whatever threat they feared might come. But they didn't just give humans these abilities. They made them earn them through evolution. The evidence was clear. The ancient engineers hadn't simply altered human DNA. They had created a framework for continued development. The dormant sequences they had discovered weren't just unused code. They were future possibilities, waiting to be unlocked as humanity continued to evolve. "There's more," Dr. Kim said, her voice growing excited. "The artifacts suggest that what we've discovered is just the beginning. There are references to other sites, other messages, hidden throughout human space. The ancient engineers left a trail for humanity to follow." As the team discussed their findings, they realized they were looking at something far bigger than just an archaeological discovery or genetic engineering. They were seeing the first pages of a story that had been millions of years in the making, a story about humanity's true purpose in the galaxy. The question now wasn't just about what they had found, but about what it meant for humanity's future. The ancient engineers had seen something special in early humans, something worth spending millions of years to develop. As the team looked at the evidence spread before them, they couldn't help but wonder what humanity might become when they finally reached their full potential. The research team gathered in the main laboratory during the late hours of the station's night cycle. The soft glow of holographic displays cast an ethereal light over their tired faces. Dr. Kang stood before the main screen, his spots pulsing with an intense mixture of excitement and concern as he presented their latest findings. "Everything we thought we knew about human evolution was wrong," he explained, manipulating the display to show a complex series of genetic markers. What we once thought were random mutations were actually carefully planned changes. Dr. Jae-yun moved closer to the display, her spots glowing softly as she studied the data. The genetic sequences before them told a story of careful design. Human adaptability, their ability to survive in almost any environment, their unique capacity for creative thinking, none of it had happened by chance. "See this sequence here?" Dr. Kang highlighted a particular section of code. "This is what gives humans their remarkable ability to adapt to extreme temperatures. But look at how precisely it's constructed. In nature, such adaptations take millions of years of random mutations. This was engineered in a single step." Dr. Lee's tentacles moved rapidly across her quantum interface, running new analyses. The engineering goes deeper than we thought. These sequences aren't just about physical adaptations. They're about potential. The ancient engineers were building in capabilities that humans haven't even begun to access. The laboratory fell silent as Dr. Kang brought up a new display. This one showed several sections of dormant genetic code, perfectly formed sequences that weren't currently active in human DNA. These sequences, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, they're complete, but dormant. They're like programs waiting to run, and there are hundreds of them. Dr. Jai Yun's analysis had revealed something even more startling. The dormant sequences weren't random. They were organized in a specific order, like chapters in a book. Each one seemed designed to activate in sequence, leading to progressive changes in human capabilities. "Look at this one," she said, highlighting a particular sequence. "Based on our analysis, this could grant humans the ability to process information at speeds far beyond their current capabilities. And this one," she moved to another sequence, "could potentially allow for rapid cellular regeneration." Dr. Yun, who had been quietly studying the decoded messages, spoke up. "The ancient engineers left instructions. These sequences are meant to activate when humans reach certain developmental milestones. They're like rewards for achieving specific levels of advancement." The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just engineered. They were still in development. The traits that made them unique in the galaxy were just the beginning of what they could become. "But there's a problem," Dr. Lee said, her tentacles moving slowly now. "If humans learn about these sequences too soon, they might try to force their activation. The results could be catastrophic." Dr. Kang nodded in agreement. The ancient engineers had been careful to make these changes gradual, allowing each new capability to be properly integrated before the next one developed. Rushing the process could have unpredictable consequences. "We found references to failed experiments," Dr. Kim added, bringing up data from her archaeological studies. "Other species that were engineered but developed too quickly. The results were unfortunate." The team spent hours discussing their findings, trying to understand the full implications of what they had discovered. Humans weren't just another species in the galaxy. They were a work in progress, carefully designed to become something more. "The question isn't just about what humans could become," Dr. Jai Yun said, her spots pulsing thoughtfully. "It's about whether they're ready to know this truth. Finding out you're an engineered species, that your entire development has been guided. How would they handle that knowledge?" Dr. Kang studied the dormant sequences again. Each one represented a potential leap forward in human capabilities. Some suggested abilities that seemed almost magical by current standards: enhanced cognitive processing, cellular regeneration, even the potential for limited energy manipulation. "We need to be careful how we proceed," he said finally. "This knowledge could change everything, not just for humans, but for the entire galaxy." As the artificial dawn began to light the station's corridors, the team continued their work. They knew they were sitting on information that could reshape galactic society. Humans, once seen as newcomers to the galactic community, were actually the product of the most advanced engineering ever discovered. The question that weighed on all their minds wasn't just about what humans could become, but about when and how they should learn this truth. The ancient engineers had left them a responsibility along with their discovery, the responsibility to handle this knowledge wisely. As they prepared for another day of research, Dr. Kang looked at the dormant sequences one more time. Somewhere in these careful arrangements of genetic code lay humanity's future. The challenge now was ensuring they discovered it at the right time and in the right way. The grand chambers of the Galactic Council had never seemed so tense. Representatives from over 100 species filled the circular room, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. Dr. Kang stood at the central podium, his spots pulsing steadily as he faced the assembled council. The holographic displays behind him showed simplified versions of his team's discoveries. Even stripped down to basic concepts, the information was revolutionary enough to cause visible reactions among the gathered representatives. Ambassador Trell of the Regilian Empire rose from his seat, his crystalline form catching the light. "This is madness," he declared, his translated voice echoing through the chamber. "We cannot allow this information to become public. The humans are barely space-capable. This knowledge could destabilize the entire galactic community." Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the chamber. Dr. Kang noticed several of the older species representatives nodding in agreement. They had held power in the council for millennia, and were naturally resistant to change. "The humans are dangerous enough already," called out another representative, their tentacles waving in agitation. "They've achieved in centuries what took most of us millennia. If they learn, they were engineered for even greater capabilities." Dr. Kang waited for the noise to die down before speaking. "Honorable representatives," he began, his spots glowing with calm determination, "I understand your concerns, but consider what we've discovered. The ancient engineers who created humanity were far more advanced than any civilization we know of. They had a purpose in mind." The chamber grew quiet as Dr. Jai-yun stepped forward to join him. She operated the display, showing the complex patterns they had found. These modifications weren't random. They were carefully planned, with specific goals in mind. The ancient engineers saw something in humanity, something worth developing. Ambassador Trell moved to the center of the chamber. "That's precisely what concerns us, Doctor. If humans learn they were designed to be superior, how long before they decide to claim that superiority? How long before they demand control of the galaxy?" Dr. Kang's spots flashed with unexpected color. "Is that what truly worries you, Ambassador? Not that humans might become dangerous, but that they might fulfill the potential the ancient engineers saw in them." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Dr. Lee, watching from the sidelines, noticed how various representatives reacted. Some seemed outraged, others thoughtful, and a few, particularly from younger species, appeared openly supportive. "The humans have a right to know their heritage," Dr. Kang continued. "They have a right to understand who they are and what they might become. Keeping this secret won't protect the galaxy. It will only breed distrust when the truth eventually emerges. And it will emerge," Dr. Jai-yun added. "The ancient engineers left markers throughout human space. Eventually, humans will find them and understand their meaning. Wouldn't it be better if they learned the truth from friends rather than discovering it on their own?" The human ambassador, who had been silent until now, stood up. The chamber fell quiet. This was, after all, about her species' future. "My people have long wondered about our place in the galaxy," she said. "We felt different, special even, though we couldn't explain why. Now we know there was a reason for those feelings." Dr. Kang watched as she walked to the center of the chamber. She was small compared to many of the other representatives, but she carried herself with dignity. "We don't want to rule the galaxy," she continued. "We want to understand it, to explore it, to help make it better. Isn't that exactly what the ancient engineers might have intended?" The debate continued for hours. Different representatives argued for various approaches, from complete suppression of the information to immediate full disclosure. Dr. Kang and his team answered questions, explained their findings, and steadfastly maintained their position that the truth needed to be shared. As the session drew to a close, a compromise began to emerge. The information would be released, but gradually allowing human society time to process and adapt to each new revelation. "We'll need to be careful," Dr. Kang told the council. "The ancient engineers left these sequences dormant for a reason. Humanity needs to develop at its own pace, discovering its capabilities naturally." As they left the council chamber, Dr. Jai-yun's spots pulsed with relief. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked quietly. Dr. Kang looked back at the chamber, where representatives were still discussing the implications of their discovery. "The ancient engineers trusted humanity with this potential," he said. "Perhaps it's time we did the same." The decision would change the galaxy forever, but as Dr. Kang and his team returned to their laboratory, they felt confident they had chosen the right path. The truth about humanity's origins was about to emerge, and with it, a new chapter in galactic history would begin. 6 months had passed since the revelation of humanity's true origins, and Dr. Kang stood in his laboratory, watching new data stream across his displays. The reaction from humans had been nothing like what the Galactic Council had feared. Instead of chaos or panic, Earth and its colonies had responded with an intense wave of scientific curiosity. Research centers across human space had begun studying the ancient engineers' work. Universities had created new departments dedicated to understanding their own genetic heritage. Rather than fear their engineered nature, humans had embraced it with characteristic enthusiasm. "Doctor, you need to see this," Dr. Jai-yun called from her workstation. Her spots were pulsing rapidly with excitement as she brought up a new set of scans. "The changes are beginning." Dr. Kang moved to her station, his own spots brightening as he studied the display. The latest genetic samples from human volunteers showed subtle but unmistakable changes. The dormant sequences they had discovered were showing signs of activity. "It's happening faster than we expected," Dr. Lee noted, her tentacles moving gracefully across her quantum interface. "The sequences are activating in response to human awareness and focus. They're literally willing themselves to evolve." Dr. Kang studied the data carefully. The changes were small at first: slightly enhanced neural pathways, improved cellular regeneration, more efficient energy processing. But they were accelerating. Each new change seemed to trigger others, creating a cascade of evolutionary improvements. "Look at this," Dr. Jai-yun said, highlighting a particular sequence. "This volunteer's cognitive processing has improved by 30% in just 2 months. And here," she moved to another display, "this group is showing signs of enhanced sensory perception." The laboratory had become the central monitoring station for human evolution. Scientists from across the galaxy had gathered to witness what many were calling the greatest evolutionary event in known history. "They're not fighting it," Dr. Yoon observed, studying the decoded messages left by the ancient engineers. The instructions suggested this might happen. That awareness of their potential would help trigger the dormant sequences. The ancient engineers built this into their design. Reports were coming in from human worlds. Children born after the revelation were showing signs of advanced development. Adults who practiced new forms of mental and physical training were experiencing unexpected improvements in their capabilities. "The Regilian ambassador was right about one thing," Dr. Lee said, her tentacles moving slowly in thought. "This is changing everything." But not in the way they feared. Humans were using their new understanding and emerging abilities not for domination, but for exploration and innovation. New technologies were being developed at an unprecedented rate. Solutions to old problems were being discovered daily. Dr. Kang moved to the main display, where a global map of human genetic activity glowed with points of light. Each light represented a human showing signs of activation in their dormant sequences. The map was growing brighter every day. "They're exceeding even the ancient engineers' predictions," Dr. Jai-yun said, her spots pulsing with amazement. "Their adaptability is allowing them to integrate these changes more quickly than expected." But not everyone was changing at the same rate. Some humans showed no signs of activation, while others were developing rapidly. Yet, instead of causing division, this variety seemed to be strengthening human society. Those who developed new abilities were working to help others understand and develop their own potential. "Do you remember what the ancient engineers wrote in their message?" Dr. Kang asked, bringing up the translated text. "They said they chose humans not just for their physical potential, but for their capacity for compassion and cooperation." A laboratory had become busier than ever. Human scientists worked alongside alien researchers, sharing discoveries and insights. The fear and suspicion that had initially greeted the revelation had been replaced by a sense of shared purpose. "We haven't just unleashed their genetic potential," Dr. Jai-yun realized, watching a group of human and alien scientists working together. "We've unleashed their capacity for growth, for adaptation, for cooperation." Dr. Kang's spots glowed with a deep, steady light as he surveyed the laboratory. The ancient engineers had seen something special in humanity, not just what they were, but what they could become. Now, watching that potential unfold, he understood why they had invested so much in this species' development. "The question isn't what we've unleashed," he said softly, his spots pulsing with quiet joy. "It's what humanity will choose to become. And for the first time in galactic history, we're all part of that choice." As the artificial night cycle began in the station, the laboratory remained active. Humans and aliens worked side by side, monitoring and studying the greatest evolutionary experiment in known history. The future was unfolding before them, and it was more remarkable than anyone had imagined. The end.